Chris Gillard is the associate professor of at University of Guelph. He teaches crop production courses to agriculture diploma students and has several graduate students that conduct research under his supervision. His research in field crop agronomy and pest management with primary focus on dry beans, which has been a very niche crop for Ontario growers for decades, typically offering high returns and with a high level of management. His role is to shape the management techniques for a crop and provide the greatest return to the growers. Chris has 3 grown children, mostly live near Blenheim. So let's welcome Chris, and I give him a round of applause, but I'd be clapping by myself. So take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Dennis, or Clarence, or whatever. Thank you for the introduction. So moving quickly into my talk, I've got a lot of slides to cover, people, so I'm going to move quickly, but thank you for the opportunity to speak in Manitoba, and thanks for not having me travel all the way to Winnipeg for it. I actually look forward to not having to travel if I can avoid it. So summary, what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to cover some of the white mold fungicide work that we've done in our program in dry beans and soybeans, and then morph into how those white mold fungicides work for anthracnose and dry beans, because those 2 diseases occur at a similar time, and then change gears completely and talk about plant health fungicides for dry beans and soybeans, some work that we've done and others have done, and finish off with a couple of slides from a colleague of mine on plant health fungicides in corn, and I guess my thoughts on corn and wheat. Okay. So I can't do a disease talk without talking about the disease triangle. So yes, you need to have the host present. The pathogen has to be present as well at a time when the host is susceptible to the disease. And with those 2, you have to have the right environmental conditions at that same time to get proper infection and proper disease development in the crop. So let's talk about white mold in dry beans first. So this is our largest foliar disease in Ontario. We can see yield losses of 50% or greater. There's all kinds of issues that you've got to recognize and to understand the risk, the field history of the disease, environmental conditions like rainfall and temperature, genetics, plant type, some characteristics of the plant that help to avoid the disease, and then some management things with row width and plant populations. So lots of things to think about. Routinely, we're using fungicides on 30% of the acres year in and year out. I emphasize at every meeting that first application timing is critical and it needs to be done early. 3 pin pods is where I target our first application. Water volume should be 20 gallons or more. Second application, 12 to 14 days after first application. If you get the right environmental conditions, lots of rainfall between first and second app, okay? So what we're targeting is the base of the plant, those bottom stem crotches and branches down here, because if the disease penetrates the stem down here and kills that branch, it kills everything above it, and that can cause a dramatic yield loss. So it's those bottom stems, so it's really critical to get good coverage for these products. In fact, I see in our trials, I'm amazed at how these products can work with the canopies that we generate in our white mold studies. So things I want to talk about, first of all, is the product efficacious? So does it work? Does it reduce disease? And does that result in a yield increase to the grower? And then once we identify the products that work, can we tweak them, product rate and the number of applications to get a better response out of the product? And then of course, we've got to make money at the end of the day. So the yield response that we get has to pay for the product, pay for the application, and then leave something left in your pocket at the end of the day. And so we spend a lot of time on economics as well. So first slide. This is a summary of my studies from 2010 to 2019. So a total of 14 studies over that 10 years. The black bar at the bottom is untreated, and I'm comparing 5 fungicides to it. So Lance, Allegro, Propulse, Cercoban, and Acapella. I divided this disease data here into low and high disease sites, and you can see the difference on the black bars, the difference in the disease that we got. Those 10 low disease sites, or 9 low disease sites. The fungicides all work pretty similarly to each other. They all reduce disease compared to the untreated, but there's really no difference between the products. We had to get to a higher disease level to see differences between the products, and that's typical for our work. If you don't get at least 30% disease pressure, we can't separate the product's performance out. But we typically find, and this is a summary of a lot of trial points, what we typically find is products like Allegro, Propulse, and Soybean provide the best response for a disease point of view. I think this slide speaks volumes for Manitoba. When I go out and speak to growers out there, they commonly tell me that they don't see a good response out of products. They don't see a yield response. And I think the problem is they're not getting enough disease pressure to really show that the products work and give you that yield response, okay? Second slide just shows the yield response that we get out of the low and the high infection sites. So the low infection sites, we get no differences between products. In fact, they're all similar to the untreated control. They're all higher yield, but they're not significantly higher. When we get to a higher disease site, we get quite a response. I mean, this is a 50–60% yield response at least for some of these products. In the course of top 3 products, the top 3 products are Soybean, Propulse, and Allegro in most of our work. Acapella does have some activity for strobilurin, but it's generally weaker. Okay. I'd like to move on now and talk about some of the other products that we've tested, because we've tested over 20 different products in the last 10 years. And so I've set all these slides up similarly. The black bar at the bottom is the untreated control. Above that is Allegro, which is one of our top performing products. So it shows kind of a worst case and best case scenario. And then the products that we tested are above that. So this is back from a paper we published in 2013, from data from 2009 to 2011. We looked at calcium chloride, which is essentially what they use for road brine for dust control. We bought a better quality product and tested it in beans because of the growers' interest in it. We also looked at a biological, Bacillus subtilis. You can see that these 2 products both were similar to the control in both low and high disease sites, where products like Allegro look quite a bit better. When you look at how they performed for yield, these 2 products were similar to the untreated control for yield in both low and high disease sites. So we really got no activity out of them. We didn't bother with economics because they didn't give us a yield response. Moving on to the next paper we published, data from 2012 and 2013. We looked at products like Priaxor and Heads Up. Priaxor is a combination of fluxapyroxine and pyraclostrobin from BASF. Heads Up is a plant extract. So both of those products tested to the untreated control and to Allegro. We got a little bit of response out of Priaxor on low disease sites, and I would expect that out of the product. We seem to get some activity there, but under high disease pressure, it's no better than the untreated control for disease. Heads Up gave us no activity for disease control. And if you look at yield, excuse me, a little bit of a bump in yield from Priaxor compared to the untreated control. Not as good as the best products we've got, and really no activity out of Heads Up. And that's based on, I think, 4 data points out of our 2 years. So the last study I'm going to show you is from 2020. This is data that we just summarized last week, last Thursday, a week ago today. Again, I've got the untreated and Allegro, and then I've got Miravis Neo from Syngenta. So that's their new active, Adepidin. And then comparing it to Oxidate. Dennis mentioned that earlier, and then Orosolute. This is just 1 year's data. We're getting some activity out of Mirabis neo, nothing out of oxidate or oral solute at quite high disease pressure. So we're up in that 60% range again. So we're able to separate treatments out nicely. If you look at yield, yield between Allegro and Mirabis Nevo are similar. Yield for the other two products are similar to the untreated control. In fact, we're numerically slightly worse. This response for Mirabis neo, I'm going to say, is on the high side. We've done some other work with this product, and I would say it's not a standalone white mold product in dry beans, not at this point. Okay, so what we've accomplished so far, we've identified Allegro, Propulse, and Cercoban as effective products. They decrease disease, they increase yield in beans. So let's talk about rate and number of applications. So I've set up a couple of slides here to describe that. To describe what I've done in the slides, these kind of reddish bars here are Allegro. The blue bars here are Propulse, and the green bars at the top are Cercoban. And these are different rates and timings. So we've got the darker bar here in each one is one application early. The middle bar for each is 2 applications at a low label rate, and the top bar is 2 applications at the high label rate. The only difference being in Cercoban, we didn't test the 1x rate, we only test the 2x low and the 2x high. Or sorry, the 2 applications low, 2 applications high rate. So under low disease pressure, well, they're all basically the same. They all reduce disease compared to the control, but none of them were really better than the other. When you get to the higher disease sites, that's where you can start separating out rates and timings. And you can see, you know, certainly a trend in reduction in disease between a 1x rate, 2x low, and a 2x high, but not a lot of significant differences there. At least not in disease control. If you move on to yield, no differences between the different rates and timings and the low sites, but at the high sites, we see some fairly clear differences between a 2x high rate and a 2x low rate for Allegro, and a 2x high rate, 2x low rate for Propulse. See the same trend here with Cercoban, not significantly different, but certainly the same trend. So we are seeing high rate and 2 apps giving us more consistency in the product's performance. Of course, then becomes the question, well, can we make money doing this, okay? With higher rates and more applications, do we make money? And so the final slide, same setup for the slide compared to the others. This is return on investment in dollars per hectare. No difference between the treatments here at the low disease sites. At the high disease sites, the differences that we got in yield really kind of fell apart here. And we don't have differences between different rates and applications for the individual products. They're all basically the same, at least statistically. So I think what happens is the yield increases that we got were eaten up by the product cost and the number of times that we apply the product. But I still think there's differences that exist. And so what I did was I gave this data for 10 years and I gave it to an agricultural economist, Richard Vine here on campus. And he's quite a magic maker when it comes to making numbers talk. And so what he did is he took that return on investment and he looked at different scenarios and rankings. So let me explain this. I could spend 30 minutes talking about it, but I'll give it to you in a nutshell. He looked at 2 different returns on investment. A lower level, which is basically a return of $0 per hectare. So you get your money back. And a higher return, which is basically, do you get your input costs back at least? Okay, so lower and higher ROI. And then he looked at risk tolerance. And he was using some tools that are used in the mutual fund industry, financial industry, where do you have a higher risk tolerance and willing to accept more variability, or do you have a lower risk tolerance and you want to have positive returns most of the time, basically? Okay. And then he ranked the different returns for the different products, and things shook out pretty clearly here, I thought. Where your expectations for ROI are quite low, so you just want to get your money back. Allegro tends to shake out on top, Cercoben in the middle, Propulse at the bottom, for both higher and lower risk. But where you expect higher returns, or where you want higher returns, Cercoben stands out on top, then Allegro, then Propulse. And I think the really interesting thing about this whole part of it is that in Ontario, 95% of the white mold fungicides used are Allegro and Propulse. Cercoben really doesn't even hardly show up on the radar. And it's an old product, it's been around forever. But man, I mean, I think we need to do more work to get this product utilized by the industry. I think there's it definitely works. It seems to work economically as well. And having another mode of action is a healthy thing in this disease-ridden world that we have. Okay, so let's move on to Anthracnose. As Dennis said, this thing can cause a lot of damage to seed quality, which impacts dry bean growers' bottom line directly. So what question I wanted to answer was, will the white mold fungicides control Anthracnose too? And the reason I ask it is because Anthracnose basically occurs at the same time. So timing of the fungicide application is about the same. So can we get two diseases for the price of one? And so it's a relatively simple study, and I've kept the treatments really simple here to be able to talk about it. Data collected from 2014 to 2018, we published in 2019. So the untreated control is in black, kind of the gold standard headline in red. Of course, it doesn't have any white mold activity, but it works very well on Anthracnose. How did the three white mold products, Allegro, Propulse, and Cercoben, stack up? Well, Allegro did good activity for disease severity, not as good as headline, but better than the other two, Propulse and Cercoben being a little bit weaker. Currently, Propulse is the only one with Anthracnose on its label, and it's listed as control. I think that's optimistic, and perhaps should be more suppression than control. When you look at yield, we got similar yield out of Allegro compared to headline, which is wonderful. Cercoben snuck up and gave us similar yield again, and Propulse a little bit weaker for yield because of the damage the disease did to the crop. And then if you look at the ROI, dollars per hectare, headline shining a little bit better because it's not just yield, but also better quality seed. Allegro being slightly poorer, Cercoben shining quite well, and then Propulse being a little weaker again, I think maybe because of the lower yield and quality. So to rank them, Allegro and Cercoben probably equal, but maybe Allegro may a slight nod to Allegro over Cercoben. Both of them definitely superior to Propulse. Yeah, I put headline here. It probably doesn't belong there because it's not a white mold product. It has no activity on white mold, so there should be probably the best ranking for the white mold fungicides for Anthracnose. Move on to white mold in soybeans. This is an actual aerial shot of my disease, fungicide disease trials for soybeans in 2017. So yes, we can get lots of disease some years in soybeans and really impact yield. So I wanted to identify fungicides that can reduce disease and increase yield, similar to what we did in dry beans. But we worked with some different treatments. So here's data from 2016 and then two sites from 2017. Products that we tested, the untreated control in black, then Acapella, Allegro, Stratego Pro, Preaxor, and Cotegra. You look at most of them had some good activity in low disease pressure in 2016. You move to 2017, and it's really Stratego Pro and Acapella that stand out as having dramatic drops in disease compared to the untreated. Disappointed with products like Allegro that work so well in dry beans, but don't seem to have the activity in soybeans that they do in dry beans. Preaxor will work some of the time. Cotegra, again, seems to work some of the time, but not as consistent as some other products. If you look at the yield response that we get a definite yield response out of Stratego Pro and Acapella in most years. And that yield response, man, in 2017, this top trial, that yield response is dramatic. We got about 100 to 115% increase in yield out of these products. So that's huge yield increase in some situations, okay? We still get some yield response out of other products like Preaxor, just not as consistently. Some yield response out of products like Cotegra, again, just not as often as others. So I think some of the other factors I think you need to consider, soybeans have a longer flowering period than dry beans, so the risk is greater. They tend to be taller plants. They're planted in narrower rows, so they should have greater chance to get disease. My feeling, though, is that most soybeans are much more genetically tolerant to white mold than dry beans, and I'll point to kind of the field experience in Ontario's point of view. We'll get a major soybean mold event about every 10 plus years in Ontario, where dry beans it's every 3 to 5 years, which says to me that there's dramatic differences in genetic tolerance amongst the cultivars that we're testing. So let's change gears completely, talk about fungicides for plant health. So a study we did back 2006 to 2009 in dry beans, kidney, crayon, black, and navy market classes, tested headline and quadris at 2 rates, half label and full label rate, which gave us a total of 16 experiments over 4 years. And then in the last 2 years, I took those experiments and I split them in half. We hailed one half and didn't hail the other, which gave us an additional 8 experiments to look at. So 24 experiments over 4 years. That's a huge data set. Thought it would be fun to show you the video quality we get back in 2008. So here. That's the hailstorm that's going through. And we tried to take off about 40% of the leaf tissue right at first flower. And I think if you look closely, you can see some little yellow flower buds there on the plants. So yeah, we beat them up pretty badly at first flower because some of the companies were promoting the use of these plant health fungicides when the plant was under stress. And so we created stress in a relatively sunny day. So what did we get? Well, this is half rate and full rate of headline, half rate and full rate of quadris in blue. We had no response in the no hail sites at all across market classes and cultivars. No response in yield. And when we hailed them, no response around the treatments again. The only real difference we had was between no hail and hail. We took out about 40% of the yield when we hailed the crop at first flower. We didn't measure any disease, so there's really no disease data to document or show you, but we got no response out of the products, and that's what we published in a paper about 2011. So then we moved on to soybeans, and we did a different study. We took 20 different cultivars. They're all Roundup Ready ones. We asked 5 companies to give us 2 resistant and 2 susceptible cultivars. I definitely got some raised eyebrows when I asked for susceptible. They all said, well, we don't have any susceptible, but then they gave us some anyway. We applied headline at 1x rate, the full rate, at an R3 growth stage, so early pods. 3 years of data, 2 sites, so a total of 6 experiments. And here's kind of a summary of the results we got over all cultivars. The only disease we measured of any extent was brown spot, and the treated headline treated plots had about 60% of the brown spot that the untreated did. That resulted in a slight bump in seed weight. That was significant. And that resulted in a slight bump in yield of about 4% over all cultivars in all years. What else did we notice? Well, we had a delay in maturity, but only for some of the cultivars. So kind of a stay green effect of 1 to 3 days, but only 12 of the 20 cultivars gave us that. The rest matured the same, whether they were treated or untreated. The yield loss from the brown spot was likely due to early leaf loss, or I would say early defoliation of the crop. And that likely meant a slightly lower seed weight and a slightly lower yield. We did have a zero net return on investment. So the yield gain that we got basically just covered the fungicide and application costs. And there was no money left over in the grower's pocket when it was done. So how does that compare to kind of the rest of the world? So other results, the best results I could find was Candle et al. In 2019, where they did a meta-analysis, 240 studies across the US and Canada in soybeans. And they found that one fungicide gave them about a 2.7% yield gain, and that was likely a strobilurin fungicide. When they looked at a combination of fungicides, 2 or 3, they got a slight bump up to a 3% gain. This is probably the most interesting fact from their study, where they found that as base yield increased, the response decreased. So in other words, it was the low yielding sites that gave the greatest fungicide response, which I was quite surprised about. And they had no return on investment when disease pressures were low. They just did not get enough of a yield bump to justify fungicide use. Okay. Last topic, fungicides for foliar disease in corn, and I'll say perhaps in wheat too. This data I get from Dr. David Hooker, a colleague of mine at Ridgetown, and that is his Twitter handle. He's huge in social media, and I ask you to direct your questions directly to him. It's one of the beautiful things when you present other people's data. So just a couple of slides. This is a total of almost 13,000 comparisons that Dave Hooker and Albert Tunuta have put together, showing quite a good yield response in corn. So in those studies, they got a 3.2 bushel yield increase in at least 3/4 of their tests, a 5.7 bushel in at least 50% of their tests, and a 9.7 bushel response in at least 25% of their tests, which is, I think, quite a dramatic increase compared to soybeans or dry beans, and likely would pay for those products at least some of the time and give you something left over. Not only that, but they showed a really clear stay green effect in corn. And so that's measured with higher moisture content. So the plant delays maturity and has higher moisture at harvest. But not only that, they also got other kind of fringe benefits because a lot of the diseases that affect corn impact the stalk and stalk strength. They actually got a reduction in lodging, and that can mean an increase in harvestable yield. And then finally, a lot of the diseases you're dealing with in corn and wheat are fusarium, head blight, that sort of thing. And so not only do they cause a yield loss, but they also cause problems with toxins like DON. And so the timing of the fungicides is not just from a let's manage this disease and let's protect yield, but we also have to protect against toxin buildup in the plant, which can reduce the marketability and the price that you get for that crop. So with that, my quick summary slide, white mold fungicides. Yes, we identified Allegro, Cercoban, and Propulse. I think there needs to be some more work done with products like Cercoban to get it utilized more in the marketplace. Soybeans, 2 different products, Stratego Pro and Acapella, in my work have shown good promise. For white mold fungicides for Anthracnose, Allegro and perhaps Cercoban have good activity and should be able to help from the anthracnose point of view, which is a big deal to dry bean growers. For plant health, for beans, really, we're getting a small yield bump and a slight delay in maturity, but we are not getting a return on our investment there. And no one else in the public sector seems to be able to measure that either. For corn and wheat, yes, I think a bigger yield bump. We're getting it better lodging and so more harvestable yield. And then there's the issue of toxins like DON. That is an important consideration for any grower. And with that, I thank you for your time and I'll take any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Wonderful presentation. I always enjoy watching dry bean presentations. We do have a couple questions because we do have, well, 5 minutes here. We're right on time here. What's the active ingredient in Cercoban?
Yeah, Cercoban is in the US known as Topsin, and it's thiophenate methyl. So it's been around for longer than I have in this career path.
Okay. Another question from the group here. They were looking at, what about Acapella and Allegro fungicides? One good for white mold and soybean and not dry beans, the other good for white mold and dry beans and not soybeans. Any comments on that? Why is one better than the other?
Well, I think Acapella has some activity in white mold, period. I think the level of disease pressure you get in soybeans is generally less. So a product that like Acapella can do a better job in soybeans than dry beans. Allegro, you know, I shake my head. I don't understand it. And I know, you know, we have different crop, we have different canopy structure, we have different different everything. So I'm not sure. And at this point, I stand by my data and say that it doesn't seem to work. I know Syngenta has data that says it does work, and we need more data. We constantly need more data to be more sure on it.
Yep. Another question here. Have you done any work with foliar fertilizers in dry beans and soybeans, especially with K foliars and potassium acetates?
I've done some work on foliar fertilizers, and actually the study that I did was looking at whether they antagonize any problems, like antagonize foliar fungicides or not. And to date, I can say that I didn't get any yield response out of the foliar fertilizers applied alone, and I didn't get any antagonism between using those products in a tank mix with a foliar fungicide.
Cool.
In fact, one of them I think probably has a phosphoric acid in it, and it's shown in the literature that phosphoric acids can have some fungicidal effect, and we're seeing some fungicidal effect out of it. It's not a standalone product, but we're seeing some effect, and that's kind of cool.
Yep. One last question, just to wrap it up here. The white mold disease percentage, was that severity for all slides, or was incidence included in that as well? So
the way we rate disease, we rate them separately, incidence and severity. So we'll take 10 subplots within a plot and rate each one separately. So we're getting a really good measure of what's going on. Incidence is 0 to 100% in 10% increments. Severity is percent of the plant that has been damaged. And we take those as two separate ratings, and then we merge them together by multiplying them together. So anything with 100% incidence times 50% severity is 50% severity index. Anything with a 50% index or incidence and a 50% severity is only 25% severity index. So you have to have the two together. You can't ignore either of them. And so we do them as separate ratings and put them together.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Chris. I think we all enjoyed it. There's lots of other questions we're not going to get to, but maybe I can summarize those and Chris can get back to you. Chris, one quick thing. Can you where can some of your research results be found?
Oh, excellent question. Thank you, Dennis. So at the bottom of that last slide, if you go to the Ridgetown campus website, you go to research, go to reports, go to my name. We summarize every study we do every year into a written report. You're welcome to look there for our individual summaries. And then I'll publish at least the abstract, the papers that we publish. And our papers, you know, for a scientific paper, they're still pretty easy to read for growers to get something out of it. So anyway, that, or just send me a tweet or email me. I'll be happy to work with you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chris.